opportunity to speak at this prestigious event. So as Ray mentioned, my name's Leon Piper, Business Development Director at Cohesity. Spent the last 20 so years in IT, predominantly in a customer-facing role, trying to understand the challenges and the opportunities that lie an organization. So for the last 10, 15 years, I've been working with financial service organizations, and today's presentation is really for me the journey of what I've seen, how things have changed, and how Cohesity fits in, and one of the key reasons of why I joined Cohesity. But one thing I'd say is that COVID has had a major impact on all of us as an organization and as individuals. But there's some positives to be taken away from that in the fact that I've always seen that there needs to be a compelling event to do things differently. People do things, they make some changes and try to continue how they would generally do things, but a compelling event really makes people stop in their tracks, think about things and do things differently. And I think that's one of the key causes of disrupting an industry and an opportunity for us all. So what I wanted to do was to put up a statement which I thought outlined the financial service organizations. It's most vulnerable industry, and the reason for that is the disrupting by software. And the reason being for that is that it's information rather than concrete assets. And it's quite an interesting statement to make, because if I think about cash, you know, I used to have a load of notes in my pocket, and that's how I would, you know, barter, pay for things. Nowadays it's contactless, or if I go on a tube, it's the Oyster card. And really it's around how we use information and decipher information that adds value. When I look at the financial services, I was thinking about, well, what is the size of the opportunity? So if I look at 132 billion, that is the amount of revenue that has been delivered by financial services organizations, Fintech, in 2018. So that's the contribution to the UK economy. And I know this is a you know, Scottish-based proposal, but when we look at the number 40%, this is the estimate of the number of people employed within the City of London in financial services or technology. And if I look back 10 years ago, the number is very low, but in today, what I've seen and what is being published is that there are over 89,000 organizations that are identified as being fintech, whether that be the one man in his back office or his garage, up to the major organizations with thousands and tens of thousands of people. Now, we heard on the presentations earlier around barriers to entry, the FCA, regulations, but these are changing, and they have to change because of the way business is done now, the way we're sharing data, how we're using data, and how we're delivering value to our customers and to our clients. So I look at disruption in that first statement, and you know, it comes back to innovation. You know, how do we do things that make things life simpler? How do we make it easier to use? And how do we add incremental value over and above what we do today? So if I look at it from a kind of fintech perspective, you know, we have these challenger banks that have come out and are doing things differently, whether it's digital platforms or offering different products and services, being more agile than the traditional banks. And I've you know, noted Monzo and Starling as two of those, but I think Devi mentioned there are 86 challenger banks currently in the UK, which is the largest concentration of challenger banks in any country across the globe. You know, we talk about trading platforms, you know, the stock markets, but things have changed, you know, whether it be social trading networks, whether it be peer-to-peer lending or financing, or just different ways of moving money around that add value to the people and the organizations that are looking at how they make things easier. We look at focused offerings, and I use a couple of examples because they're relevant to me. I've moved around probably 6 or 7 companies in my career, And I now have 6 or 7 pensions, each with of those organizations. I haven't moved those into a consolidated bucket because it was cheaper for me to leave them there because of the low management costs. But an example is Pension B of creating a kind of smartphone platform for for people like me that have multiple different types of pensions that want to manage it, be able to access those easily and be able to do it at a low cost. I also have kids, so what I want to do is try and get them into the management of money, and I use the Go Henry cards, and that's a great way for them to be able to sort of get their money and to manage that money and spend it. But then I also thought about, over time, how is that information going to be used? Are people going to take that information about my children and work out how they're using that money, how they're spending that money, how quickly they're spending that money, on what kind of products are they spending that money? And so as part of this, it's all about the consolidation of data or information if it adds value. The next area is around the kind of robo-advisors, using a kind of algorithms to create a cheap platform for financial advice and investments. And these are the kind of things that we're seeing that are trying to reduce the cost of actually doing business. And then we look at diversification. I just use Revolut as an example, where it started off as a kind of foreign exchange platform to actually reduce the cost of being able to move money from one currency to another, to increase over the last 5 years to have multiple offerings and different sort of products. It now has over 12 million customers, and there are over 100 million transactions per month. So you can see the amazing growth that's gone on. Now, these are some of the examples that I show that are regular names, but if we look at 89,000 organizations, there are many that are doing some great things that we don't necessarily get to see because they're just establishing themselves and building out. So if I look at what technology is underpinning this, and how is technology helping the fintech organizations, we see many people talk about machine learning and AI. From a fintech perspective, it's helping with creating predictions, giving insight, working out from macro levels how marketplaces are changing to sort of more micro level how people are making decisions and what they're doing. Machine learning, from my experience, is established and is being sort of used widely, but AI is still an emerging technology from my own personal view. But as it moves forward, will help organizations become even more sort of laser focused on delivering value. The next area is big data. So it could be seen from either a client perspective or from an organization, but from a client perspective, it's trying to understand the kind of investments those people are making, how they're making those investments, looking at what the strategies they're sort of putting in place and how other people can use those, but also then using that information and that insight to create investment portfolios to then be able to offer out to new or existing clients. And from an organizational perspective, it's looking at how can I use that insight to stop things like fraud detection. If we look at one of the recent IPOs, Snowflake, last week or so, its focus is a data management play, and it IPO'd and it was worth $70 billion, which was a huge amount, but just shows the value that people put on getting insight from their data. RPA, robotic process automation, it's been around for a number of years, starting to come more to the forefront, taking the mundane tasks of what humans do, freeing them up to be able to be more productive, whether that be the UiPath or Automation Anywhere or other sort of subsidiaries like Rainbow Technologies. If we look at a UiPath, it's now got a valuation of over 10 billion before its IPO. So people are seeing the value of what technology can bring to support these kind of initiatives. And finally, obviously, blockchain, it's been around for a while, but I would still suggest it's an emerging technology. It's still looking at, how does it become the norm of the way we transact with our money. So I put this slide in because I think it does depend on where you are on the journey. I've worked for a number of companies, some of them very large and some of them that are pre-IPO that have moved to IPO and some that are pre-IPO. Everyone talks about growth, and that's a common factor, but whether it's 5 or 6% for a very mature marketplace organization, or whether it's at least 100% year-on-year growth, I think it really does depend on where the true focus is. But there gets to a point where efficiency becomes just as important as growth, if not sometimes more important. The questions around, what is the cost of me doing business? Does it make sense for me to be doing business? When am I going to be cash positive? How am I going to be able to deliver these new products and services to the market without being inefficient? And underpinning all of this, and it comes in varying guises, is risk. How do I manage the risk to my business? How do I ensure that my business is still going and doesn't go down? And what happens if there's a ransomware attack? How am I going to cope with these things? What happens with regulatory bodies if they make changes or look at investment strategies? What do I need to do? So these are the kind of three areas that I think vary in terms of its context of importance. But I also see risk as still being, wherever you are, as being a fundamental supporting act. Now, from a Cohesity perspective, when we look at an organization, we like to see them as an iceberg. And if you look at the bottom bit, we see IDC suggests that data has grown from 2010 to 2020 by 44 times. And we see this and broken down into two parts, a kind of primary production environment, and then everything else, a secondary data source. And what we do find is that a traditional organization may well have a data center and then may have a number of remote branches or remote offices, and starting to look at the cloud and how they use that. That secondary data is made up of things like backups, object storage, test dev information and analytics. Not only is it sitting in that data center, but they may also use the cloud. Some of the conversations I've had with organizations as to what do you move into the cloud, it's just I move whatever I have on my data center that I think for my application from there into the cloud. There's no cleaning up, there's no management of that, and so that incurs a huge cost of managing it. And people talk, earlier they were talking about how cloud is seen as expensive. One would suggest that that predominantly might be in the amount of data that's being put in there that's not being used. And we like to call this mass data fragmentation. Information for me is an output of using the data in the most efficient way. Data is just a load of numbers, ones and zeros. Information is the output from that. So if we look at how Cohesity works, we apply a kind of smartphone analogy to data management. We act as a data platform. We're a software defined platform that enables organizations to manage all workloads and data. Now, our first kind of application, as it were, is data protection. Similar to a phone where you're able to make calls. That's what our heritage is. But what we see is a much bigger play for an organization in terms of simplifying the way they do things. Whether that be, file and object storage, your archival, your analytics, the big data stuff. What we do is we manage that by creating a single interface that allows you to give a kind of a view into your environment, and rather it be dispersed across the entirety of the locations. You get to manage that globally from one insight. Now, we talked about earlier as one of the key attributes of technology for financial services, machine learning. We use that as well. We're a software-driven company, and our aim is to make it easier for those that use our product to do business. So it's all around operational efficiency. It's all about giving you guidance and understanding of where you are, what you need to do, and how you do that. I think the vision for Cohesity, though, is about changing the way you see the use of data. Many organizations have data, and then they take a copy of that and put it somewhere else, and then try to maximize the value of it by putting some applications on it, whether it be kind of big data, or whether it be some other kind of sort of test dev environments. Our aim is for organizations to bring third-party apps such as the big data apps, Splunk and etc. to the data, and use that data as the repository. So rather than having to sort of create multiple copies, you use that single copy, and therefore you're leveraging the data that you have, as opposed to making it less competitive in terms of its cost. I put in an example of a leading bank, in Europe, and the reason why I do that is really around that. The focus was initially around information protection. It was enabling them to improve the way they backed up their infrastructure, the way they managed their infrastructure, and reduce the actual cost of ownership of that data. And that's using our IP around algorithms and the way we do things. But it set up the organization for innovation, and what it did is it enabled that organization to then look at how they take new products and services to market, how quickly they're able to access the data that was live, as opposed to taking month-old data. And it freed up them to be productive in their environment. So I talk about a little bit about the financial services, the fintech, the technology, a little bit about Cohesity, and then I put this last slide, which is a Cohesity slide, but I think actually it's a slide that covers everyone, whether it be fintech or whether it be any organization, including Cohesity. The first thing is around simplifying operations, making it easier to do business, whether that be on premise, whether that be in the cloud, or whether it be on the edge. It's having a way of managing things and liberating you to add value. The second piece is around continuing your business. We hear about ransomware, we hear about all these hackers, and we hear about people being put in situations where their business goes down, or they're threatened that it will go down. Having the capability to provide that business continuity is a must, and it's something that Cohesity excels in. Doing the right thing, as I talked about earlier, data has an intrinsic value if it's leveraged in the right way. But having 10x of that data reduces the actual the value of what data is. And Cohesity has a very focused opinion on how we reduce the amount of data you need to hold, significantly improving your savings. And technology, everyone talks Amazon, they talk Google, they talk Facebook. We've provided a kind of Google-esque approach to things. It's all great and well having this data. It's all great and well having this, user interface that looks at all my data, but how do I get to it? So we've created a kind of a Google-esque search engine that enables you to focus on what you need and get that at a touch of a button. And as I talked about the vision, it's around giving organizations the ability to leverage what they have, make it data an asset, make it information, leverage that information to be disruptive to the other marketplace that you're trying to focus on. We mentioned ransomware, and I think it just keeps on coming up. It's so important in today's society where COVID has opened up a plethora of ways for people to take advantage, and the focus is ensuring that we protect, that we detect, and that we're able to respond to that threat. So from a very high level, these are the kind of things that Cohesity is in their DNA, and I think most organizations looked to try to deliver this in some kind of functional way. But we're running a booth, so it's a virtual booth, and we are the guys that are offering the outdoor cinema package. So come and have a chat with us, get entered into a free draw. More than happy to discuss further around Cohesity, what we do, how we do things, or anything else that you want to discuss. But I really appreciate the time, and Ray, thank you.
Thanks very much indeed for that, Leon. I've just had a couple of questions that have come through to myself, which, if you don't mind, I'll pose them to you. One of the things is how do you enable the customer to reduce their backup window? What's the process there?
Okay, so the reason for the challenges with that bank was that they had multiple different environments with multiple different vendors, and each of those were having a specific resource to deliver that return. From a Cohesity perspective, what we were doing is creating this software platform that managed that data and created a single use space. So what we're able to do is apply the policies and structure to be able to deliver on that sort of saving.
And in terms of the greatest benefits derived by your customers, can you give us a quick run through there?
Yeah, so in the first savings that we get are around the operational costs. It's about leveraging that software-defined architecture to consolidate things. So that's the people, that's the software licensing, that's the hardware infrastructure. But it's not just the backup. What we found is that by utilizing the data in one place in situ, we're able to create multiple copies without having an impact on the actual amount of infrastructure required for them to go and use for things like test dev and innovation, to look for analytics, using big data. It's really about simplicity of operations, and that's where we see our largest savings.
Thanks, Leon. And in terms of deployment, I mean, obviously, I think a number of speakers earlier on were talking about, the implementation of new technologies and how that can be challenging and cumbersome. How does an organisation normally deploy Cohesity at the front end?
For me, it's a journey. You start off with maybe a specific application. It may be that you become the target storage. What we're trying to do is to enable an organization to start managing their data in the most productive way. We do file as well, object storage. We extend out into the cloud. So most organizations have a strategy of looking at how they either move to the cloud, how do they consolidate, how do they transform, and it's really down to that customer experience that we look to develop. So yes, taking a set use case, starting there, proving out our worth, and then expanding from there.
Leon, thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gents, before you leave, just a reminder that Cohesity are exhibiting here today. Please drop in, have a chat. Heather and the team will be there, and I think Leon as well, to answer any questions that you might have. And in my humble opinion, I think they have possibly got the best prize out of the lot on their stand, the outdoor cinema package. I know they've used it on our platform before, and it's proven to be very, very popular, particularly in the current times. But for now, Leon, thank you very much indeed for your support today. And ladies and gents, we look forward to seeing you in the main sessions later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers.